Okay, we good to go? Okay, good. Yeah, it's like being in a studio with all of this. Welcome everybody to the third and final of our faculty development seminars for the EU Studies program. And I'm Michael Bond. I'm the executive director of the EU Studies program of the University System of Georgia. And I want to once again thank Alistair Young and the Georgia Tech Center for European and Transatlantic Studies for organizing this series for us. And it's been a very valuable thing for our program. And Alistair arranged all the speakers and did most of the legwork putting this together. So I want to thank him very specifically, and also the European Commission, which I think at least indirectly is funding this through an Erasmus Plus grant for the Center for European and Transatlantic Studies at Georgia Tech. I want to, before I introduce our speaker for today, I want to make a brief remark about the protocol for asking questions when we get to that point. There's two circles of attendees, presenters, that's the European Union Studies program faculty. You can use your cameras, you can ask questions when it comes to the question and answer time directly, verbally. I don't know if there's a raise your hand function on this program, but just go ahead and speak up or raise your hand on the camera. Then for other attendees, students and other faculty attending, you can ask questions using the chat function. Send your questions via chat when we get to that point. All right, so our speaker for today, and the topic, by the way, is the elections in Germany, the recent elections in Germany and their impact for the impact on the European Union, Germany's role in the European Union, and also their implications for U.S. European relations. But our speaker is Dr. Claire Greenstein. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. She conducts research on reparations for human rights abuses, as well as research on transitional justice more generally. She's also written widely and taught on German politics. She earned her PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and was a postdoctoral fellow in the Center for European and Transatlantic Studies at Georgia Tech. I'm sorry, the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech, to be more precise. So, Claire, thank you for being with us today, and this is a very important topic, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say about it.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm really excited to be here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so here we go. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for attending as well. It's always nice to have someone to show up to listen. So as Michael has already said, the topic of my presentation is Germany's role in Europe after the September elections. So in order to kind of orient you, it's important to figure out what was Germany's role in Europe before the elections. And for the last 16 years, Angela Merkel, who was until recently the head of the Christian Democratic Union, which is a center-right party, she has been chancellor. She is known for being a very savvy politician, very careful. She looks to see which way the wind is blowing before she decides to leap. She is often accused of being boring, but Germans really like that. They value stability, predictability, and Angela Merkel has certainly provided that to Germany. And the fact that she's been chancellor since 2005 made these elections quite important, which is my guess as to why you requested this talk today. People really aren't sure what Germany looks like without Merkel. For many young voters, this was the first time that they were old enough to vote, and Merkel wasn't the prospective chancellor. So it really is a sea change in German politics in a sense. Under Merkel, the EU certainly was quite important in German politics. And Germany plays a large role within the EU as the guarantor, essentially, of stability, especially financial stability. So Germany took a leading role in the response to the Eurozone crisis, as well as the refugee crisis. So, you know, with somebody else taking over, with Merkel not being the one directing policy anymore, there are a lot of questions. Germany also has quite a sense of responsibility to the EU. It is very aware of German history and how that has affected Europe. So as you know, Germany joined the EU in large part to tie its own hands. And the EU has been effective at that. There are a lot of checks and balances built in to ensure that Germany can't dominate the EU, but also Germany doesn't really want to. It is, as I said, aware of its responsibility, aware of the role that it is expected to play, and aware that other countries are skeptical of German power and influence, have negative experiences with that in the past, and so they are very careful about trying to walk that line between playing the power role that's expected of them versus not overstepping and being perceived as aggressive. In addition to restraining Germany, the EU also augments German influence. So it's kind of an unusual balance there. Germany certainly is powerful on its own. It has, you know, a leading global economy, but as part of the EU, it has much more influence than it otherwise would. It's able to punch above its weight, essentially. So as a leader in the EU, Germany is then able to exert more influence in the EU and consequently globally. So in the words of Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who is a member of the Social Democratic Party, so the center-left party, he was also a former foreign minister for the country under one of Merkel's earlier governments, and he's currently the German president. And in his words, Germany is the chief facilitating officer of the EU. So it's not trying to dominate the EU, but it does play a steering role, and it does make sure that things day to day run smoothly and predictably. This is a really positive thing for the EU to have Germany playing this role, because Germany is incredibly committed to the project of the European Union and to deeper and to a certain extent broader European integration. Up until 2015, with the aftermath of the financial crisis and also the ongoing refugee crisis, Germany did not have a nationally competitive party that was openly Eurosceptic. The AfD, the Alternative for Germany, stepped in to play this role in 2015. But up to that point, Euroscepticism was just not really on the political agenda in Germany. Germans are, by and large, very committed to the EU, to remaining in the EU, to promoting the EU, the peace and economic benefits of that. They can directly see, you know, why this is important, and they are really proud to be EU members. So whereas in other countries you have Eurosceptic parties that win national elections, you don't have that in Germany. Germans really are behind the EU project as a whole. All right, so leading into the elections, as I said, things were kind of up in the air because what do we do without Angela Merkel? The CDU, so Angela Merkel's party, was in the lead initially. There had been last year, I believe, the CDU held internal elections and, you know, campaigns as to who is going to lead the party now that Merkel is stepping down. Merkel had tried to hand select a successor. The successor kind of bobbled things and was deemed not likely to win an election, and therefore she stepped down as party leader. So eventually, in this internal CDU power struggle, Armin Laschet rose to power and became the face of the CDU. Merkel previously had committed to staying out of the campaign, but Armin Laschet had so many negatives about him that she stepped in and started, you know, giving speeches and campaigning for him. Laschet, the reason that he is so disliked is he is seen as a politician who will say and do anything to win. So the perception is that he's not guided by principles, he's guided by an interest in power. And for all that Germans don't always agree with Merkel, even the ones who don't agree with her see her as competent and as somebody who is guided by a set of principles. So they might not agree with what she does, but they respect that she has a moral compass and that her decisions are based on that. Whereas Laschet is not seen as having that same morality. And in July, there was a campaign event, or not a campaign event, a public event where he was seen acting in a way that kind of confirmed voters' suspicions of him. So Germany experienced severe flooding this summer. Whole towns were basically destroyed, people died. It was a massive cleanup effort, really traumatic for lots of Germans. And I want to show you a quick clip of this moment where Armin Laschet was making an unforced error. So here we go. This is Frank-Walter Steinmeier is making his public speech of condolence to the flood victims, and then you can see the arrow is pointing towards Armin Laschet in the background.
Die große Verluste erlitten haben, dass ihnen Hilfe zuteil werden soll. Und diese Hilfe, die zugesagt ist, soll auch gelten für die Gemeinden, die in den nächsten Tagen und Wochen nicht nur aufzuräumen haben, sondern die vieles wiederherzustellen haben. Straßen, die kaputt sind, Brücken, die verloren gegangen sind.
Okay. So as you can see from that clip, that basically just reconfirmed, or not necessarily reconfirmed, but confirmed voters' suspicions that this man he doesn't care about ordinary Germans. He's just in it for power. You have the SPD, a representative, not the candidate for chancellor, but a representative of the SPD, the current German president, speaking, expressing condolences, and then you have the CDU representative laughing in the background. So that was really a big gaffe and an unforced error that caused the CDU to dip in the polls quite dramatically. So I'm going to switch back to that PowerPoint. So the CDU was leading until early August. After this gaffe, it started to become more of a neck-and-neck race between the SPD and the CDU. And by the time the elections rolled around at the end of September, the SPD was expected to win. The SPD announced that it wanted to form a coalition government with the Greens. Germany always has coalition governments just because of the way its electoral system works. And so parties will, before the election, say, hey, if possible, here are our desired coalition partners, here is who we're unwilling to work with, and so that voters can then go into the voting booth and be aware, all right, if I vote for the Greens, I'm voting for an SPD Green coalition. Or if I'm voting for the CDU, I'm voting for a CDU FDP coalition, or whatever. So this SPD was expected to win. They wanted to govern with the Greens, and then the hope was that the CDU would come in second in the elections and so could form the official opposition. So the title of official opposition is given to the largest party that is not in government. And up until, I think the new Bundestag was seated last week. So up until last week, the AfD, this far-right, racist, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, Eurosceptic, this was the official opposition party. And In some parliaments, that's a very important position, not as much in the German parliament, but there are a couple of perks. So your speaking time in parliament is, it's allotted based on the percentage of the seats that you have. So the more seats, the more speaking time. So if the CDU ends up with more seats than the AFD as the opposition, they're going to get more speaking time, which will reduce the AFD's national platform. And then also the official opposition traditionally gets some important committee assignments. They usually get to be the head of the chair of the budget committee. So if the CDU were the official opposition as opposed to the AFD, then you'd be cutting the AFD out of access to the media, additional platform on the nightly news, things like that. So that was also a goal. And what we see in the elections is a mixed member proportional electoral system. And this is where voters cast 2 votes. So on the left here, this is where you vote for your district candidate. So this is just like in the US, where you go in and you say, this is the person I want to be my congressperson. And whoever wins the most votes gets that seat and will for sure be headed to the Bundestag, to the German parliament. You don't have to win 50% or more, you just win more than anybody else and you get the seat. And you can see as a German voter, you have a little bit more information than you do as an American voter. You have the name of the candidates, you have their party, you have where they live, and then you also have their current job. So this Bundestagsabgeordneter, you can see that Markus Weinberg is currently, or was at the time of the election, a representative in the Bundestag. The SPD's candidate is a lawyer. This representative or would-be representative is a student, and so on. You can also see if people have advanced degrees. Germans really like their titles. So you can see this person is a doctor, that person is a doctor. Probably not a medical doctor, but some sort of doctor. And then you also have a vote here on the right side for a political party. And what it says up here, all of this information is given to you right on the ballot. What it says here is that this is the determining vote for the division of the total seats in the Bundestag. So which parties or how many seats each party gets will be determined by the percentage of votes that they get from this second vote, is what it's called. Zweitstimme is second vote. So you can see here that you are not voting for individual candidates, you are voting for parties. So the CDU, SPD, Greens, and so on. And there were, I think, like 14 or 15 of them listed on the ballot, but I cut it off in hopes that you could actually read some of the text. And it also gives you the names of some of the candidates on that party list. So if the CDU wins 20% of the party list votes, then it gets 20% of the party list, or 20% of the seats in the Bundestag. And then those seats will be filled partially by whoever wins the district seats. So let's say the CDU gets 20% of the seats. That's about 140 seats. They will have, let's say they win 40 seats from the direct elections, then they still got 100 left to fill. And those will come from the party list. So people who are high up in the party, if they don't win their district, they can still get into parliament by being elected from the party list. So what this does is it allows voters to feel a connection to their representative from their district, and it also allows people to vote for their preferred party. So in the US, generally people hold their noses and vote for a party that could win. Maybe they really want to vote for the Green Party, but they know that the Green Party is never going to win anything in the US system, so that's a wasted vote. In Germany, that's not the case. Yeah, the Green Party is smaller, it's not one of the top 2 parties, but if you vote for the Green Party on the party list, then you aggregate that across the country, and the Green Party can actually do reasonably well. They can win, 10, 15% of the vote, and get 15% of the seats. That actually can get them into government, depending on the coalitions that can form afterwards. And voters realize this. So they go into the voting booth not thinking of who is going to be my personal representative, so much as how do I vote in a way that enables my desired government coalition to form. So if I am an SPD voter, I will probably go in and vote for the SPD candidate and the SPD party. If I'm a Green Party voter, I'm not going to vote for the Green district candidate because the CDU and the SPD are the most competitive parties in my district. So this would be a wasted vote. There's no way that Linda Heitman, as wonderful as she is, will ever win more votes than everybody else. However, I know that the Green Party and the SPD party have agreed to form a coalition. So I will vote for the SPD candidate because I know that they have a chance of winning. So I make my mark here, and then on the party list, that's where I vote the Green Party. So you end up with a lot of ticket splitting in this system, and it's very strategic. Voters are thinking about who is going to get into government. What is that coalition going to be? How do I facilitate the coalition that I want? And here is what we got in these most recent elections. So as expected, the SPD did win 25.7% of the vote. They are the largest party in parliament, and Armin Laschet, his party, lost a lot of seats. So this was really quite a defeat for them. Unfortunately for the SPD and the Greens, together, they do not have the 368 seats that they need for a majority. These parties here, this is arranged from ideological left to ideological right. So you can see the AfD, the far right party, is all the way on the right. And then over here is Die Linke, or the left. They're kind of the successor of the Communist Party. So Greens and SPD are disappointed. They can't get 50% or more by combining together, so they're going to have to add a third party to their coalition. Ideally, they would have gone to the left party. You can see they're all ideologically connected. They are all on the left spectrum, but the left party did really poorly. And so this, even these three parties together is not enough to form a governing coalition. So the SPD and the Greens turn to the FDP. And this is a little bit of an uncomfortable choice because the SPD is center-left, both socially and economically. The Greens are all about the environment. They support generous welfare policies. They also favor regulation so that we can have environmental regulations and things like that. The FDP, however, it is socially liberal in the sense that it doesn't think the government should be involved in your private life, but is very fiscally conservative, very free market, neoliberal, deregulation, and that is direct contrast to what the SPD and the Greens want. So none of these parties are thrilled about having to go into coalition together, but that is their best option at this point. And you might see in the news comments about this being a stoplight or a traffic light coalition. That's because of the colors associated with the parties. So you've got red, green, and yellow are the colors on a stoplight. So this would be a stoplight coalition. Sometimes, if you have the Green, the FDP, and the CDU, that would be the Jamaica coalition. Or if you had the SPD, the CDU, and the Greens, that would be a Kenya coalition. So if you see those terms, that's what it's referring to, is the colors of the parties in the coalition. All right. Oh, and this dot right here, yes, they got below, obviously, 5% of the votes. And Germany has a 5% electoral threshold. You must get at least that much nationwide in order to enter parliament. But this is an ethnic minority party. So Germany has a few national minorities, nationally recognized minorities, and they have certain privileges. And one of those is that they do not need to meet the 5% threshold because, understandably, if you're a small ethnic minority, there's no way you ever would have nationally 5% of the vote. So for this, they're exempted from that 5% threshold. And for the first time in 60 years, a member of an ethnic minority party won their district seat and is therefore going to parliament. So, all right. So we have the SPD, the Greens, and the FDP have officially entered into coalition negotiations. Everybody looking at the election results was like, well, we think these will be the parties that negotiate, but now it's official. They started exploratory talks and they released an initial agreement paper on October 15th saying, here's the framework for our negotiations. Here are the things that we absolutely 100% agree upon that we'll tell you about right now. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details as we negotiate over the next however many weeks, potentially months, hopefully not months, but we'll see. So what we do know at this point is that there have been several social policy agreements. The SPD, Greens, and FDP have some overlap with social policy ideology. So one of the things that they're doing is they're raising the minimum wage. Germany has a minimum wage that is set to raise automatically every year, but I think it's by 50 cents or a euro possibly. So instead of going from like 9 to 9.5 or 10 euros next year, it's going to jump from 9 to 12. So that's in the agreement. There are also retirement protections. So the retirement age will not be raised. They have also agreed to start to phase out the current unemployment framework, and instead of unemployment benefits, they're going to implement a minimum basic income. They also are going to keep the health insurance system mostly the way that it is. They're just going to expand emergency coverage and care for lower income people. And then finally, there is an extreme housing shortage in Germany right now. So we have that in the US, but in Germany, especially in the cities, it is impossible to find an affordable apartment. So they have committed to building 400,000 apartments every year, and 100,000 of those will be government subsidized. Economically, they have a few agreements. This is one of the key areas where we should expect to see conflict within the coalition, because again, you've got the SPD and the Greens on the economic left, and you've got the FDP all the way in neoliberal economic right. So they have agreed that they will not be raising taxes. They've also agreed to retain the debt brake. So basically, Germany has amended its constitution to include a clause that says Germany essentially cannot go into debt. It cannot exceed its budget. So the US, is constantly raising the debt ceiling. Germany can't do that. It has to keep a balanced budget. And then the last point is an attempt at making energy more affordable. So energy costs are quite high in Germany. And part of the reason for that is they have had an automatic tariff on your energy bill, where that money goes to fund investment in renewable energy. It's also supposed to incentivize people to switch to renewable energy, make it more available, things like that. So there's been criticism on the left and the right about whether this is really the best way to incentivize switching to or investing in green energy. And as energy costs have continued to rise and people are really, looking at the bill and getting sticker shock, this potential coalition has said, well, we would drop that tariff and we would invest in green energy another way. The details of that we don't know, but they will be dropping that tariff, so consumers' electricity bills will be lower. Environmentally, this is the Greens' big issue. And they got a pretty big win in that Germany was supposed to stop using coal power by 2038, but the Greens have negotiated it down to 2030. Again, no details about this yet, we'll see. And then the FDP got a win with no new speed limits. So as you may know, the Autobahn, there are no speed limits. And if you drive above 55 miles an hour, then it's pretty inefficient. You're releasing more greenhouse gases. It's bad for the environment. And the Greens wanted to implement speed limits on the Autobahn, but that is not going to happen. So they did get the coal power thing. They are not getting speed limits. And then one other point that they've agreed on is they are going to lower the voting age to 16. So that was already the case in some local elections, and now it will also be the case in the next set of Bundestag national elections. All right, so here's what we know. Here's the basic framework. What should we be looking for? There are two really key points here. First is, who is going to get the finance minister position? This is critical. Finance is the FDP's big issue. This is what their voters really care about. And so everybody knows that Christian Lindner, who is the head of the FDP, is gunning for the finance minister position. However, the SPD and the Greens really do not agree with the FDP's economic ideology, and they do not want for the FDP to hold the finance ministry. The problem here is that because this is the FDP's big thing, this is the ministry position they really want, they might threaten to withdraw from the coalition if they don't get it. In which case, the SPD and the Greens do not have that 50% majority that they need to govern. So Christian Lindner really holds a lot of power here in the negotiations. It's important to keep in mind that, the FDP is a junior partner in the coalition. The SPD and the Greens will have to agree before anything becomes official policy. They're not going to leave the FDP to make economic policy all on its own. It will still be a coalition that they have to all agree to whatever policy it is that they propose. Also, Olaf Scholz, the head of the SPD, who, if his party can form a governing coalition, he will be the new Chancellor of Germany. He is a previous finance minister, so he knows how the ministry works. He knows bureaucrats, he knows the ins and outs, and that will presumably enable him to keep a pretty close eye on Christian Lindner. So whatever it is, if Lindner gets that ministry position, Scholz will be able to perform an oversight role a lot more easily than other people might. And given the divergence between the coalition partners on this issue, they will be very specific in their coalition contract about what the economic policy will be going forward. So some caveats there and unexpected, or not unexpected, but uncertainties as to what's going to happen. This is a really key point. The other thing to look for is, how is Germany going to make this coal withdrawal happen without raising taxes? Those two goals and promises of the coalition might not be compatible. And so they're going to be negotiating details, over the coming weeks. Okay, what probably won't change? Germany's commitment to the EU will not change. Germany is going to continue to take the EU very seriously, to be committed to the EU project, to favor stability and predictability, and to take their responsibilities quite seriously. The SPD has also been in government with the CDU since 2013. So you have had top-level SPD politicians who have been interacting with the EU for almost a decade now. These are people who have already formed relationships with EU bureaucrats, with EU leaders. They know how it works. They are committed to Europe, and they favor stability. So they're going to kind of continue to play that leading role, especially because of the economic aspect. So as you can see on the right here, Germany contributes more to the EU budget than any other EU member by quite a wide margin. And Germany actually pays more into the EU than it gets out. But, people in Germany tend to still be pro-EU despite that. So Germany has the right, in a sense, to play a big role in the EU, and they will absolutely continue to do so, especially after Brexit. So now you only have Germany and France as the heavyweights. Germany is going to really have a leading role in the future of the EU and the direction it takes. Germany will also play a big role in EU-US relations. That has been the case for a while. That will continue to be true. And it's also going to keep attempting to lead Hungary and Poland back into the democratic fold. So Hungary is now an illiberal democracy. Poland is headed that way. There's, it's iffy in the Czech Republic, although they had a recent election that ousted their populist leader, so we'll see. Germany and the EU have yet to find a way to push Hungary and Poland back towards democracy. They're certainly going to keep trying. If they ever figure it out, I will be very impressed, but it would be wonderful. What changes should we expect? So at the domestic level, we should definitely expect a policy shift to the left. We used to have a center-right government in Germany, for the last 16 years we have, and now it is center-left, despite the presence of the FDP. The effect that this will have on international politics is uncertain. So Germany is very fiscally conservative, very cautious. This is a legacy of the hyperinflation and the Great Depression, the 1920s, where basically there was so much economic turmoil in the country. Then you have the political turmoil, and that helps. It doesn't cause the Nazis to take power, but it certainly assists in their rise to power. And so fears of inflation are they don't have an ideology in Germany. Everybody is terrified of inflation. Everybody wants to be very fiscally responsible. And we do see that Germany has maintained, the coalition has already agreed to maintain its debt brake. So it is clearly taking a conservative fiscal position. However, the Eurozone was really rocked by the financial crisis. Germany, as you would expect with its fiscally conservative positions, was a leader in the response to the Euro crisis, helped implement and advocated for very strict austerity measures in an effort to get countries back into compliance with the standards that you have to do to be on the Euro, so your debt to GDP ratio and things like that. These rules were suspended after the financial crisis or during the financial crisis because it was just going to be too punitive, too impossible. These rules are supposed to re-implement in 2023. And you would have to implement even more austerity to get countries into compliance with these rules. And the last time Germany pushed for this, made it happen, you saw a massive explosion in populist parties, left and right, all across Europe. The austerity was just incredibly hard on everyday people, and populists seized that moment and rose to power. So the SPD and their governing partners might not want to re-implement these deficit rules. But given that it's Germany, it is possible. So we'll need to keep an eye on that. We can also expect Germany to be even less interested in defense spending now. So Germany, by and large, people are very skeptical of the military. There isn't, like in America, this, you need to be proud of the troops, you need to take pride in the military, respect the military. In Germany, people are very skeptical. Given the Nazi history, people look at the military as, why would you want to go into that? You must be very conservative. And the army also has a history of far-right extremists, even neo-Nazis, infiltrating the military. There have been some plots uncovered recently. So that does not bode well for defense spending in Germany. The SPD already is ideologically less inclined to invest in the military than the CDU would be. That could strain transatlantic relations. American presidents are always going on about how their NATO partners aren't living up to the 2% commitment, defense budget spending that NATO members are supposed to do. So Angela Merkel had promised to get Germany up to the 2% minimum by 2025. It is unclear that Scholz would have that same commitment. So that, the US might not be thrilled about that. This could also, reduce German defense spending could be a European problem as the US reorients towards Southeast Asia. So as the US focuses more on China, it's going to pay less attention to Europe. We've seen that recently with the submarine deal that really upset French President Emmanuel Macron. So if Germany, as a European heavyweight, is not investing in defense, and the US is no longer focused on paying for European defense, where does that leave Europe? So we'll see. We should also expect to see much more climate catastrophe mitigation. So with the Greens as part of the government, if this coalition does end up running the government, the Greens are really going to push environmental policy. Germans on the whole are quite environmentally oriented. Even people more to the right of the political spectrum are pretty eco-conscious. And the SPD will certainly be willing to go along with that. The FDP could be a sticking point. So the Greens will not be able to get everything that they want because the FDP favors deregulation. They don't want all of these strict environmental necessities. They want the free market to take care of the environment. So if the Greens can make the case to the FDP that there's money to be made by investing in renewable resources or by new research or whatever it is, that these eco-friendly measures can benefit business, then it's more likely that we'll see even further climate catastrophe measures. Okay, and then here is just a quick look at, you can see how Germany is not meeting its 2% standards. So that might cause problems with the US and with NATO. Unknowns. Russia. We don't know what the SPD position will be on Russia. Merkel had a working relationship with Putin. She did not like him, but she was raised in East Germany. She spoke Russian. She understood the context and the culture and was able to negotiate. We're not sure what the SPD is going to do. You also have seen the recent completion of Nord Stream 2, which is a gas pipeline from Russia to Germany that will then supply energy to Germany and the rest of Europe. And as I mentioned, energy costs in Germany are quite high, and this would be a way to reduce those. However, Russia has a history of cutting off its natural gas supplies when it wants to. So it likes to mess with Ukraine by occasionally cutting off their gas supply there. It could do the same to Europe. The Greens are also really unhappy about Nord Stream 2. They never wanted it to be built. And they have recently lodged a court challenge based on EU regulations to Nord Stream 2. It's unlikely that that will have any effect, just aside from delaying the startup time. But it's important to keep in mind that this is a potential point of conflict within the coalition, and also we're just uncertain about how Germany is going to handle Russia. China is also another big unknown. There's a lot of Chinese investment in Germany, especially in the East, which is more economically depressed. There is a lot of German investment in China, so unclear as to what the policies will be there going forward. There's also been refugees coming from Belarus. So Belarus has had, it's been a dictatorship, for 30 plus years now. It never really, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it did not democratize. And so there has been a political crackdown, and people are trying to flee. So they're leaving Belarus, they're trying to cross into Poland. Poland is trying to push them back. People who do make it often cross from Poland into Germany. This is a very different type of refugee stream than the one that caused the 2015 crisis. But that 2015 crisis was hugely influential in shaping German politics and European politics. It almost cost Merkel re-election last time around. So we'll have to keep an eye on Belarus. And then also Brexit. You know, we've got a new German government. We've got a new European Union system with no UK. This means that Germany and France are the two big leading powers, and will be able to shape things more to their liking. The UK was always dragging its heels and trying to block things, and so without the UK, Germany has the potential to steer the EU and actually make things happen in a way that it wants. So when are we going to know more? When will I have answers for you? Hopefully, you invite me back in January. People are hoping that the talks, the coalition negotiations, will end by Christmas, so that we will have a new government in the new year. In the meantime, we have what's called a caretaker government. So the new parliament just started sitting last week, but the government is still being run by Angela Merkel and her current cabinet. As a caretaker government, she's not supposed to make any big decisions, sign treaties, negotiate, whatever. Just keep the government running. The day-to-day business can happen, but policy shifts will need to wait. And so for this reason, it's really important that Germany not take too long. People are, ready to start working with this new German government, whatever it looks like. And it's important for stability and for progress that process not be dragged out. All right, and that is my presentation. Thank you so much, and I am looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Claire, for a great presentation. Great job, especially given all the uncertainty right now, right, with the coalition negotiations, and we don't, know for sure the outlines of the new government. Yeah, we have time for questions. Here again, just a reminder, the EU Studies Program faculty that are attending as presenters, you can ask a question by raising your hand on your camera or just speaking up, verbalizing your question. If you're attending as a student, you can send a question via the chat function. We'll try to get that answered. So good. And any questions for Dr. Greenstein?
I guess I've answered everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got plenty, so I can
go for it.
One of you talked about the question of how we're going to finance in Germany the energy transition, right? The phase out of coal and also the necessary spending on infrastructure for climate change and all of that. We have a lot of the same issues here in the U.S. But one of the more interesting things I've heard in recent days that really has very tremendous implications for the European Union is that the new coalition might be open to financing, since they've agreed to no new taxes, they've agreed to keep the debt brake and all of that, that they may be open to financing this spending, this environmental and climate spending through the issuing of Eurobonds, European debt. In which the Commission would issue bonds and basically raise money that way for money that Germany and also other EU countries could spend on this on environmental spending. And this would mimic what happened with the Pandemic Relief Fund, which was approved back in July 2020. For the first time ever, the EU approved issuing bonds and going into debt in order to fund EU spending. But it was said at the time that would just be a one-off, right? That wouldn't happen again. But clearly, as a set of precedent now, and now apparently in the coalition negotiations, the all the parties are open to this idea of maybe using EU spending to finance this infrastructure, climate change, environmental spending that's necessary, rather than raising new taxes on Germans. So just wonder what you thought about that, and if you think that's likely to happen.
That yeah, that's really interesting. So I didn't run across that when I was doing my research for the presentation. But that seems like, since they did open the door for that with the pandemic ones, and Germany is constantly trying to get other EU countries to invest more in, climate initiatives, that might be a really good way to be able to finance it domestically without upsetting voters. I mean, German voters are on board with climate protections for the most part, but the extent to which they're willing to have their taxes raised and to affect German businesses, that depends. So I think that yeah, like if they could do it at a European Union level, that would probably give some cover to the German politicians, and it could also have broader positive effects across Europe. Another proposal that I'd seen was that they were considering not raising taxes, but having like premium charges on certain investments. And that would be more of a domestic thing, the kind of tax the billionaires idea. So yeah, I don't know which way they're going to go, but the Eurobond certainly seems like a distinct possibility.
Yeah, I mean, the irony there is that Germany's always been one of the main countries resisting that, right? That idea of Eurobonds. And so now the new government may actually become an advocate of that. So that would be a big turnaround.
Yeah, definitely. I think I saw.
Other questions? Olavi, did I see you?
Olavi, did you have a question?
Okay.
Well, I've got another one then. And this concerns foreign policy. And you said that a big question, outstanding question, is who's going to get the finance ministry, but it's also a question of who's going to get the foreign ministry. And my understanding is the Greens are really pushing for that. Maybe Annalena Baerbock as a possibility. And what would the implications of that, and also the Stop Traffic Light Coalition in general, for German foreign policy, and especially U.S. Germany relations, because there's some contradictory signals here. On the one hand, the new government, and especially if the Greens have the foreign ministry, is likely to be tougher on Russia and China, because both the Greens and Free Democrats favor that. They want to be more critical of human rights abuses and all of that. But so that would make the U.S. happy. But then on the other hand, as you point out, the new coalition probably is going to not be in favor of more defense spending, if anything, reducing it, and that would make the U.S. unhappy. But also there's this issue of nuclear sharing, that elements of both the Greens and the Free Democrats, Greens and the Social Democrats oppose basing U.S. nuclear missiles on German soil and are calling for those to be withdrawn. And that, of course, would be a big issue in U.S.-Europe relations. So overall, on balance, do you think a red, green, yellow coalition would be one that would improve U.S.-Europe relations, U.S.-Germany relations, or is the potential there for for more conflict?
First, I'm going to apologize for the construction noise outside. Hopefully you can't hear that too much. I think the real strain on U.S.-German relations was Trump, and the fact that he is no longer president, that regardless of what it is that Germany or America does, they are both grateful to have a negotiating partner that they can work with, and that they can talk to on the level that they're used to, and kind of that predictable, stable politics. So Germany is an important ally for the US. I don't see that changing, even if Germany fails to live up to its NATO obligations, which frankly I think would be quite likely. That's always a point of contention. I mean, that was a big issue for Trump, but it's also been an issue for Obama and Bush, and it's always a problem. So, you know, at this point, it's like beating a dead horse. Like, oh, yeah, okay, fine. Like, I know you want us to do something about this, but we haven't, and it's never caused an actual problem before, so we're just going to keep doing it. So I think that the defense spending thing will definitely happen. The issue then is Europe or Germany, are they willing to then deal with an American turn towards China, towards Southeast Asia, you know, and less defense investment in Europe. So if the US isn't there to pick up the slack, you know, is Germany okay with that? My guess is yes. I don't know that the Baltics would be so on board with that. So that could certainly cause tensions in the EU. There's always been talk of like an EU army, and so we'll see. We'll see. I think that the US would tolerate the lack of NATO spending, but might not be as willing to continue paying for European defense. And Europe is just going to have to decide what it wants to do there. As far as, you know, China, human rights, I think US and Germany are very similarly placed there in the sense that they say they care about human rights, and the Greens certainly are really pushing that. But they also have such close economic ties. You know, the investments are extensive both ways. And so how far is Germany really willing to go to push human rights when it needs Chinese investment in the East for revitalization? And it, you know, has big contracts in China. I don't know. And they might be like the US in that we've got a lot of talk, but like actually doing something effective about it is much harder. Let's see. Oh, and as far as the Greens being in charge of the foreign ministry, they've had that position before. And so they have like a party memory of that. It is quite an important position in Germany. They are definitely gunning for it. I think the general consensus is that Annalena Baerbock would be a very good foreign minister, that she has the political savvy, that she's very, you know, a good negotiator, quite intelligent, informed on the issues, and that she would be a good representative. As I don't know what specific changes she would bring, but center left and center right in Germany are not super far apart. And so whatever the coalition contract is, I don't think it will diverge wildly from what we've seen from Germany in terms of foreign policy for the last 16 years. I could be totally wrong, but that's my expectation.
Okay, thank you. Other
I have a question. Rick Ryman here. Claire, what is the contingency for these coalition negotiations going on endlessly? I don't know what the history is. I don't know if there's any contingency if they can't agree. I don't know if ever there's been a situation where coalition agreements or coalition negotiations have broken down. But what might happen?
Great question. So this actually did happen after the last election. The CDU had wanted to govern with the FDP in coalition, and they just didn't have the votes, and they weren't able to pull in another party to get to the vote threshold that they needed. And so what they ended up doing, and they had wanted to have a CDU coalition with a much smaller party so that the SPD could go into opposition and keep the AfD from being the official opposition. Like that was a big goal. When it became clear that that negotiation was not going to work, the CDU and the SPD agreed to go into coalition together again. Neither party wanted this. They really wanted, everybody knew that Merkel was retiring soon, and they wanted to be able to go into the next election as distinct parties. And if they're governing in coalition, it's much harder to assign responsibility and for the voter to determine, okay, yes, like the CDU did this, the SPD did this, And therefore, I as a voter know that I want this over that. But because, the politicians did not want to piss off the voters by saying, we don't like the results that you gave us, go vote again. That can be very damaging, especially to the larger parties. If they saw the CDU negotiating and the CDU wasn't able to get it done, they probably wouldn't do so well in the next make-up elections. So my guess, and again, this is the guess, the last time I predicted anything, I said that Putin would not invade Crimea, and he did a week later. So I don't predict things anymore. But you could see the SPD going into coalition with the CDU as the junior partner. Neither party would like that at all, but it could happen. And my guess is that that would be more likely than what you've seen in Israel lately, where they negotiate and can't do it and they call a new election. They can negotiate and they can't do it and they call a new election. And voters, as we've seen, they hate that. I also don't think, because Germany likes stability, that we'll see what we've seen in Belgium, where they go without a government for 3 years because they can't agree and they don't have a new election, they just keep talking. Germany is too important for them to be with a caretaker government for very long. So I think the SPD, the Greens, and the FDP have a lot of incentives to figure this thing out, because their political futures are going to take a hit if they don't.
Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for asking. Okay, I see some questions in the group chat. Michael, should I just read those out?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I haven't. Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead and tackle those.
All right, so from Olavi, is austerity still likely in Germany after Olivier Blanchard signed a mea culpa himself after the crisis? I would think that Germany would be leery of further austerity based on how it incentivized the rise of populism all across the European Union. It really drove a wedge between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, Northern Europe and Southern Europe. It is part of the anti-EU rhetoric that led to Brexit, that has caused Hungary to continue to democratic backslide. So especially with a center-left government in power, I think that Germany would be unlikely to push for austerity, at least at the EU level. But they are so set on fiscal responsibility that I wouldn't rule it out. I would say it's unlikely, but I wouldn't say never, because with Germany and finances, they're so cautious. Second point is no nuclear energy. So what is the alternative? And does Nord Stream 2 weaken German credibility as it threatens to add a split in Europe and go against the spirit of EU Zusammenarbeit? I mean, this is a toughie too. So Germany does have a lot of wind power and solar power. They have, as you note, committed to no nuclear energy. Germans are very skeptical of nuclear power, and after Fukushima, agreed that we're going to stop using this entirely. I think they're kind of stuck, at least in the short term, right? Nord Stream 2 has happened, the contracts have been signed, the FDP and the SPD are on board, even though the Greens are not. People might not like it, but I don't see that they have a choice, and I don't see it stopping. Now that it's built, it's going to be used. I do think that it threatens German credibility. I think that it does pose a reputational problem. It does give Russia leverage over Germany and therefore over the EU. So yeah, I really don't think it was a smart move politically for Merkel to allow it. But she did, and here we are. I'm sure she had her reasons. I know Gerhard Schroeder was really pushing for it. So now he's a good friend of Putin, and he was kind of a mentor to Olaf Scholz. So it's going to go forward. I don't think it's politically great if you want to push human rights in Russia, but it's there. Point 3, Germany is sending police support to Poland to keep Iraqis and Syrians from entering the EU. After a brief moment of openness, is the Trumpian approach to refugees Germany has implemented likely to continue in the new government? So, tough to say. The Greens are generally very pro refugee, asylum seekers, being welcoming. That's kind of the spirit that they were founded on, is that like revolutionary 1968, anti-establishment. They've certainly become an establishment over time, but they are very human rights oriented. So my guess is that they would push for a stop to that. The FDP is probably in favor, and then the SPD. My guess is that they would continue that because they saw what happened to Merkel when she pushed for openness. I mean, it nearly unseated her. Everybody loved her, and she got so much pushback that she almost lost the next election. And the SPD has only just taken power again after 16 years. I don't think they want to endanger that. And even very educated liberal, in the sense of progressive Germans, many of them have skepticism about integrating Syrian and Iraqi refugees. This is less so in the West, but very heavily so in the East. Where there are no immigrants, people tend to be scared of immigrants. So again, just a guess, but I would guess that this would be how Germany would continue its refugee policy. Yeah, all good questions. Let's see, am I supposed to
Okay, I think those are all the chat questions we had, and those were from Matthew Colassa, right? From not Olavi, but from Matthew from St. Andrews.
Okay.
I guess it's coming from Warsaw. So.
Well, thank you for being here. It's great to have you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? We still have a few minutes.
I'm happy to not predict things for you.
Well, here I'll ask you to predict then.
Oh no.
You mentioned the policy towards Poland and Hungary and the democratic backsliders in Eastern Europe. Merkel, of course, was criticized a lot for being too accommodating and not being assertive enough, and a lot of speculation as to why. But you mentioned that the new government might have a different view of that. Any indications on your end for what their approach might be?
I mean, I really don't know what recourse they have. I think they could step up the rhetoric. I don't know that they want to, especially with Germany and Poland, given that Germany has invaded and murdered and took territory. Germany's really reluctant to push Poland because there are still those historical bad ties, and any sort of aggression, perceived aggression, trying to nudge Poland in any direction, that would be a boon to the governing party in Poland. They would then be able to pick that up and say, look, see, Germany is this aggressive monster that we always knew they were, and therefore you have to vote for us, and only we can protect ourselves, and then you get farther and farther away from democracy. So I think Poland is trickier for Germany in particular. I think that the Greens would, especially if they get the foreign ministry, you might see increased rhetoric about Hungary. So there's kind of been a reluctance to criticize Hungary publicly, even without doing anything, just to talk about it. So that might increase. You might also see Germany trying to use its influence in the EU to consider, especially now that the UK is out, to kind of rework some EU rules so there would be more potential consequences for Poland and Hungary. And part of the reason that we haven't seen action there is just because nobody expected this to happen. And it was a gradual decline, and it was coming while populism was on the rise all across Europe. So people didn't really realize the EU wasn't prepared for, they have no framework for what do we do when people stop being a democracy in an organization that requires you to be a democracy when you join. They did not anticipate. And so it's been quite a shock for them to wrap their heads around it. I think for all of us, it has been. And they don't have the tools they need to enforce any sort of penalties. So the new government might try, to figure out what some of those approaches could be. Maybe if they issue Euro bonds, they could have restrictions on that, or I don't know. Hopefully they come up with something.
Yeah, it really is kind of a problem from hell. So
yeah, like they did not anticipate it, and they don't know what to do about it.
All right. Well, gosh, I think we're near the end of our time here. If there's no other questions, there don't appear to be, unless I'm missing something. But thank you once again very much, Claire, for a wonderful presentation, and a lot of things to keep our eyes on here going forward. And so we'll do that. And gosh, it'd be nice to have you back in 6 months just to follow up on all this. If we could,
I will happily do it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all of you who attended for your attention and your great questions.
Great. Well, thank you again, and Alistair, thank you as well, and thanks everybody for attending. Bye.